From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Decant. Most importantly, you are here, and that makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. This is part 2 of our 2-part, or possibly 3, 4, 5-part series on the JFK assassination. Now, in part 1, fellow conspiracy realist, we established Kennedy's background. We talked about some of his notable wins, some of the controversies of his administration, even before the assassination, and we went along the official timeline of the murder, along with some of the issues that people have with that story. So, today, in part 2, we're getting to the juice. We're getting to the red meat. We're diving deep. So strap in. Here are the facts. We established this earlier. It's amazing when you think about it. The public, both in the U.S. and abroad, largely disagrees with the government's official opinion on this assassination, to say the very least. Like, even the most skeptical people may think twice about agreeing with the Warren Commission.
Oh, very much so. Why? Because it's the government telling us what the government did. No, I'm just joking. It's not what the government did. It's just their official findings, right? But they're all paid by us? Wait a second.
well, and drug revenue. Hey.
Yeah.
But this is weird because these conspiracies, as we said, they can seem widely varied, but they're all feeding from that same faucet that you just described, Matt, the very American distrust of the government, which I would say is a healthy distrust, and the continued secrecy, the continued stonewalling, the various discrepancies that have come out in the decades since the murder. There are different perspectives on these discrepancies, but there's one thing that stuck with me that I wish got pointed out more often. And this is a little bit of a stick in the mud kind of thing, but it's important to note. First, of course, this murder investigation gets a lot more scrutiny than an everyday homicide. And that's logical. And it makes sense that it would receive more scrutiny in the decades after, because sadly, we have to remember, there are so many homicide investigations in the U.S. every year, and in almost every country every year, and they can all each have their own discrepancies, inaccuracies, missing paperwork. These cases, when discovered, they don't automatically send people into the land of conspiracy. Bureaucracies are big, they're unwieldy, they can screw up. And if you are, just a regular person, then your case, even if there is, well, pardon my French, some afoot, your case is not going to get as much attention as it would if you were president or even a celebrity. You know what I mean? That's just the reality, and things can get lost. Incompetence is, I don't want to say common, but incompetence happens, and in its own cold way, that's kind of as frightening as the idea of a highly organized conspiracy. Right? Like, what would you prefer? Would you prefer a successful cover-up, or would you prefer a bunch of people who are just so bad at their job that they couldn't figure out what happened to the president?
Apples to oranges, my friend. No, I'm kidding. It's true. It's a very important calculus. I think I would prefer the laser-focused cover-up to utter incompetence. But wouldn't you argue that maybe we sort of get kind of a mixed bag of both? Sometimes
I just had an image, and you guys tell me what you think about this. It feels like the government is mom and dad. We're all the kids. We're in the back of the van. We're going on a road trip. Just our entire lives. It's a giant road trip with the government driving. It's mom and dad. We're in the back, and we hit something in the car. It's night. We don't know what it was. We have no idea. Mom and dad get out of the car and confer with each other while we're all in the dark, still in the van in the back. And they have to come up with like the story of what happened in reality we hit a dog that ran across the street, but we don't want to tell the kids that we hit a dog because that would be terrible. So we come up with the story that we tell the kids. Is that crazy? What do you think?
No, I mean, everybody builds their own mythologies, whether you're talking about a family or a nation or a community or a church or a company or whatever people call their thing that they get together to hang out in.
Well, I guess what I mean is they're the ones in charge, so they have to come up with like the official story of this is what's happened, everything's okay, basically.
I think in a lot of cases that we've looked into, maybe I'm in a bit of a bubble here because I've spent so much time stuck in this world, but I think in a lot of cases what happens is somebody screws up due to incompetence, right? Or due to factors beyond their control, act of God, et cetera, et cetera. And the actual conspiracy is an exercise in covering up that incompetence. Like, it is possible, we're not going to say 100% this is what happened, but it is possible that someone in the Secret Service accidentally, panicked, best of intentions. Like we mentioned in part 1, they're trying to draw their firearm and accidentally shoot the president. And that's like not something you would want to publicize. So that accident or that incompetence, rather than a conspiracy, becomes the genesis of a conspiracy for the government to protect itself or to protect its own image. But again, there's that. While that is a very popular theory, especially in recent years, that hasn't been proven conclusively. But we don't know what's proven or disproven conclusively because we can't read it. It's like one of those NDAs that doesn't allow other people to read the NDA. What's in there? We don't know. It's like the National Invention Secrecy Act and the gag order they pull where you can't talk about what happened. We don't know. We don't know how many inventions have been pulled by Uncle Sam, and we don't know what happened with JFK, or at least what the CIA found, because they're not going to tell you until they get more black markers.
So, at the time of his demise, John F. Kennedy was one of the world's most important human beings, one of the most recognizable names and faces in the entire world, the entire planet. Maybe even the most important, of everyone. Given his influence over a global superpower like the United States during an incredibly dangerous, divisive, and heady time as the Cold War. So in short, Kennedy definitely had some enemies, both foreign and domestic. And pretty much any president is going to, rub some people the wrong way or be seen as an adversary, which is why you'll find claims implicating everyone from the CIA to the KGB to, like we discussed in the last episode, the mafia, to Fidel Castro, to even the Secret Service, the organization that's intended to protect the president. And also Kennedy's own vice president, Mr. Lyndon B. Johnson. So just how many conspirators are we talking here?
Oh, yeah. Shout out to Vincent Bugliosi. Did some excellent work on the Manson case. He's a former LA district attorney. I do recommend, he's also a great writer. I recommend reading his stuff. He had this statistic that really stuck out to me. He said in his estimation, as of 2013, so it was a while ago, that 42 different groups, 82 different assassins, and 214 different, just people had been accused of being involved in the assassination in one way or another. That's a lot of people. That's many groups. That would be a testament to cooperation if that were the case.
Wait, is that like all working together for the assassination, or is that like one assassination theory was like two groups, 7 people? Like, I just don't. I don't know. It's the latter, not the former.
Okay.
It's not like a big Avengers Endgame team up, but just a bunch of people saying this was the plot of the movie.
Got it.
Movies. But as we've seen, they all kind of coalesce and depart and converge at these different moments. So our question today is, do any of these claims actually hold up? And on the other side of the coin, do we know of any that can be entirely dismissed? The answers get murky pretty quickly. Here's where it gets crazy. getting right into it. Weirdly enough, most of these ideas, they're either unprovable or they suffer from glaring plot holes, if we're going to keep the screenwriting analogy going. But a lot of people believe some version or another, or believe at the very least some part of one of these stories. Again, even if in all the rest of their conversations, they are the most skeptical person post James Randi on the planet. And that's because they're strange things about this story, both leading up to November 22nd, 1963, and in the wake of the assassination. You could call them coincidences, you could call them just complications, or you could call them discrepancies, or like many people, like more than half of America, you could call them indications of a conspiracy. And why do we know this? Why can we say this with such certitude? Because people have been tracking the public opinion about the conspiracies since November 22nd, 1963. Like continually, Gallup has been tracking this.
Oh, yeah. And they keep tracking. You can check it out right now. They update it. I can't remember the exact last time they updated it, Ben, but it was like for the 50-year anniversary. And again, there's it's just they keep tracking it, and it's around 50%, right? I think it was 52%, and then we talked about 61 maybe percent in our last episode. It's a little over half of Americans right now believe that something weird went down with JFK's assassination. So I think it would be smart if we use this episode to really, let's break down some of these theories. Let's look at the suspects. I've heard a lot about Lyndon B. Johnson, and he's probably one of the major suspects simply because he potentially had something to gain directly if JFK was out of the picture.
Right. That would be the idea. I mean, it's a brutal concept, though, to think that your only way toward promotion is to organize the death of your boss. Corporate America can be ruthless, but I don't know how often it gets to that level. But maybe. We
all saw House of Cards. We know that people do anything to get to the top.
Yeah, starring Jenny from Forrest Gump, and it was always her, right, the whole time. There was never anybody else that was the lead in that show, I don't think.
History is important and the truth is important. Kevin Spacey had taken time off from doing his regular creepy stuff to act in that show. That's probably, unfortunately, the best way to phrase it. Oh, man, yeah, I did really like parts of that show. Well, you're right. What will people not do for power? And though this number of people who believe in some aspect of the theory, though it's waxed and waned over the years, you'd be interested to know that the number of people who believe Oswald acted entirely on his own is surprisingly low. Like for a while, it was hovering around 30% in a poll. More recent polls from Gallup and 538 have indicated that, like we said, the majority, a narrow majority of people in this country are convinced there was a conspiracy afoot. So let's dig into the suspects. Let's start with one of the inside job theories. Let's start with a man that was so proud of his junk that he gave it a name and showed it to his coworkers. That's right, folks, none other than Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson. We have some people who are convinced they've solved this one, by the way. So the core of the Lyndon B. Johnson conspiracy is, how would we describe it? This guy wants to be president so bad that he kills his boss. Is that it? That's like the gist, right?
I mean, I think that's the kind of theory that almost seems like it's plausible, right? When you hear that, or maybe even imagine it, if this was a murder investigation on a TV show that we watch every week as Americans and or wherever you live, I'm sure there are true crime shows wherever you are, we'd look at somebody who has motive. And I mean, being next in line for the presidency could be clear motive.
Yeah, that's true, because there's not going to be an election held for a time. You're just automatically going to be the acting president. All right, so that's a powerful motive, right? Even if we take the personalities out of the equation, the core of this conspiracy seems to hinge on the allegations of one person. It's a person named Madeline Brown. No relation, I presume, right, Noel?
I don't think so. No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so no judgment if that's the case. But Madeline stated that she had an affair with Lyndon Johnson, who was a known philanderer, and that before the murder, the night before the assassination, LBJ was at a party, and he was there with Richard Nixon. He was there with the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, and she said that LBJ, kind of after a conversation at this party, LBJ came to her and said in her ear, whispering, "After tomorrow, these Kennedys will never embarrass me again. That's no threat. That's a promise." So that's what she said. And then
that is not what she would never say that. She would never.
That's her idea of the account. But there's this guy in the world of independent research whose work is pretty solid. He's a guy named David Perry, and he's really skeptical. Just so you know where he's coming from, folks. He believes he's debunked this, and he says that his research has proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that LBJ could not have been at that party that night. Instead, he echoes the belief that we talked about earlier in part one, which is that a lot of people in Texas didn't particularly care for Johnson. So if you don't particularly care for someone, they make an easy target for, gossip and things like that. So he was just kind of like, like people who are very, very anti one political figure or celebrity or another it's easy for them to agree when they hear rumors that this person has done something unethical, illegal, or murderous. Like if you already don't like, if someone already didn't like Ronald Reagan or Hillary Clinton, and they saw something that said, hey, these folks are out here, I don't know, committing stamp fraud, kicking babies. They're running up to strangers and slapping their feet. And you already didn't like him. You'd be like, yeah, I always thought Reagan looked like a foot slapper. You know what I mean? Look at you. Is something in the eyes. You could tell.
Dead eyes, like a doll's eyes. like a slapping doll's eyes.
Except when they see toes, they light up. Yeah. So this seems like, at least from this perspective, it seems like, sure, Johnson, as any politician at that level would be, is perhaps madly ambitious, but he was also not an unintelligent person, and he had to be aware of the potential chaos that would ensue globally, not just domestically, but globally, if a president was assassinated.
But he also knows he could take the reins and everything would be all right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. He's one of those people who's like, oh, it'll be better if I do it. I mean, which, a lot of people are, even though a lot of people are wrong in that estimation. At this point, we're giving you just a taste. That's one of the big suspects, but a lot of folks feel that for various reasons that has been debunked. We're not saying it's been totally debunked yet. We're saying that the majority of people believe that to be the case. The majority of people who have investigated this don't seem to think it was Johnson. So let's pause for a word from our sponsors, and we'll return with more suspects. If we can't find somebody in the executive branch, what about corporate America?
Ooh, tell me more. I mean, after the break. Okay, so before the break, we alluded to going into the corporate world now with this particular conspiracy rabbit hole. So what are we talking about? Business interests like big oil or the military industrial complex, for example. The idea being, specifically with the military industrial complex, the idea here is that the war in general is good for business, which we have talked about many times on this show. We have a whole episode about that, I believe. Right, Ben?
Yeah, we do. We also know the full Eisenhower quote, the one that popularized the phrase military-industrial complex. What he was originally going to say was military-industrial congressional complex. Someone pulled his leash before he got to the public. So we know that, first, I mean, if we just unpack this a little bit, we know that the military-industrial complex is real, and it is tremendously powerful. And in fact, government agencies have done the bidding of corporate America, right? There was not really a compelling reason for the U.S. to invade Guatemala. That's the number one example. There aren't always compelling reasons of democracy driving U.S. intervention in other countries on pretty much every continent except Antarctica. Some version of this has happened. So the two forces intertwined, the military power and the corporate power, they can do a lot of heinous stuff. And they have, you can see recent examples where, I'm trying to remember which multinational just got accused of working with warlords to keep whatever their product is extracting on time.
Well, I know there was the whole thing with chocolate again,
yeah.
And child labor and all the major chocolate companies. And
palm oil, that's another one. Rare earth minerals or metals, excuse me. There are all kinds. The idea there is that it kind of ascribes a motive in that it makes it sound as though oil cartels, it's an appropriate way to describe those operations. It makes it sound as though oil cartels and people like Lockheed and their version of the Halliburton and what have you all said, well, we've got to have war. War is an economic necessity. So
for us,
well, for everyone, for the greater good, harumph, harumph, harumph. And this Kennedy guy is just not getting with the program. That's ridiculous. We thought he was one of us. He was born into this class. How dare he betray us? And it's true that JFK did talk about coming to some resolution. But I could not find, I'd be interested if there was, but I could not find any specific claim or timeline about pulling out from Vietnam, which did, of course, accelerate massively after Kennedy's assassination. But then again, you get into speculative history, like how much of a difference would he have made if he had been alive? Were the die already cast? You know what I mean? Had the dominoes from the French Indochina War already fallen in such a way that the U.S. was going to be there regardless? I mean, would Gulf of Tonkin still have happened? That's the big question, right? Gulf of Tonkin did not happen. We can say that, right?
I know. I'm just playing.
Is that a spoiler now?
No, it's not a spoiler. I just got scared. I thought I heard something behind me. It was just her, Scully. Okay, so I want to talk again about MLK because it's not as though John F. Kennedy was going around being anti-war, anti-Vietnam War, but the possibility that maybe he wasn't pushing things the way that certain powers wanted him to push things. It makes me think about how Martin Luther King towards the end, 1966, 67, mostly 67 and 68, he's speaking out directly against the war in Vietnam and he gets killed. Thinking about Robert Kennedy and what he was trying to do just before he got killed. I don't know, man. I think it's maybe the combination of those three assassinations, for some reason in my mind, makes this theory, like there's business interests of some kind having to do with the Vietnam War and conflict profits in general. That's what makes it feel real to me, I guess.
I feel you. And then also, I mean, there's the idea that Martin Luther King was assassinated due to his power to inspire the masses for social change. Right?
Sure.
Yeah, which would include everything from pulling out of wars to, you know, having a more equitable society in general, you know, in all ways.
Yeah. He was getting close to the S word, the dirty, dirty S word. Not shit. Socialism.
Oh, no, not that one. Ew.
I know, right?
Cross fingers. Get away from me.
Yes, exactly. And then just for the record, Robert F. Kennedy was shot by Sirhan Sirhan fatally on June 5th, 1968. So there's a very, very short interval of time, which means it's not implausible to ask. It's not implausible to ask if these murders were related, because he was a U.S. senator at the time of his death. Also,
well, pretty close to being president.
Yeah. Also, I'm just going to go ahead and point out again, it's weird when family members are are functioning at the highest level there. In a meritocracy, people's kids shouldn't hold the same office as their parents. Like, the odds against them being actually qualified for that are incredibly low. And it's kind of silly that we pretend collectively it's not riddled with nepotism.
And isn't it just a bit of a coincidence that coincidence is already happening, and then both of them get assassinated by lone gunmen? Oh, okay.
One of whom may be getting out of jail.
For like good behavior, or he's exhibited human-like traits for long enough that he's been allowed to go free. Wasn't he like the Manchurian Candidate kind of conspiracy wrapped up in that whole deal?
Yeah, that was the idea. He's maintained that he's maintained that it really wasn't his decision. And he has a lot of supporters, you know, Sirhan, that means. He also, in 1982, Sirhan Sirhan told the parole board, quote, "I sincerely believe that if Robert Kennedy were alive today, I believe he would not countenance singling me out for this kind of treatment. I think he would be among the first to say, however horrible the deed I committed 14 years ago, that it should not be the cause for denying me equal treatment under the laws of this country." The chutzpah there, you know what I mean? To say, like, look, the guy I shot would say that you dudes are being unfair.
Jeez.
If he were here right now, he would have my back. He's not here, and we don't have to get into why, you know, let's not get bogged down in the details. I just want you guys to know that he would agree with me in this situation. Yeah. The family, many of the surviving Kennedy family members, of course, don't agree with that. So there was something else we talked about briefly in part one that I'd love for us to go back to, and it's the mob. It sounds interesting. Over time, at least 3 different mafia families have been accused of being involved. Mafia outfits in Chicago, Miami, and interestingly enough, in New Orleans. To date, right now, officially, there hasn't been anything solid enough to support these claims. It's kind of a transference of properties. You know, you think, okay, the mafia, they do bad stuff. We can generally agree it's bad to assassinate anybody, including a president. But it was a point we brought up earlier, independently deciding to assassinate a president just because of ideology, it feels out of character for the American mafia, because at the end of the day, they are business enterprises, which means they would need to have some sort of clear benefit, whether that's cash, whether that's immunity, whether that's getting a slice of some other future criminal empire. They would almost certainly have to be hired by somebody, is what we're saying. They wouldn't have come up with the idea on their own. It's not like Marlon Brando is somewhere and talking to Lee Harvey Oswald and saying like, oh, and this the day of my daughter's wedding, you ask for a favor, I give you this rifle, you go kill this Kennedy, or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it.
Jeez.
But people in the world of law enforcement and the world of the CIA and the FBI definitely had back channel connections with the mob. They had informants, some highly placed. They also, at times, I feel like it's a dirty secret, but I think everybody kind of acknowledges this. They also at times had made tacit agreements to ignore one thing as part of a negotiation for something larger, you know, and that's, you can see smaller versions of that in true crime shows or in fictional dramas like The Wire, right? Where someone says, look, I'm not going to bust you for this heroin. I need to know about blah, 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 blah. And we talk about that in Spycraft as well. So it feels like they could have been involved, but they would have been hired hands, if that makes sense.
It feels like there could have been a political alliance in some way, maybe, with like a singular crime family, right? One organization, not just the mob, right? So if you're thinking, I think we mentioned Miami pretty extensively when we were talking about the revolution in Cuba and then the CIA's response and some of the training that the CIA and other intelligence groups were doing with like the resistance, basically, and training people to go in there during the Bay of Pigs and other tragedies that occurred there. I don't know why they would want to take out Kennedy, though. And it's just nothing has been fleshed out enough, at least to my satisfaction, to show a connection that would be strong enough to make me believe it.
We do know that mob families tend to be a little further right on the spectrum, political spectrum, in some cases extremely, and they've been active before with secret government initiatives like Propaganda to Do, for instance, or what was the other one? Operation Gladio. You know, like,
the stay behind armies?
Mm-hmm, the stay behind right-wing fascist armies. But yeah, I'm tempted to agree, unless something else comes out. It's there are several very interesting characters in that world of conspiracy, including Jack Ruby, right? Strip club owner. He seemed to be very well acquainted with some of the less savory elements of Dallas. But that all feeds back to this one idea that Oswald did not act alone. And this is where we enter like the land of meta conspiracy. That's a single thing most people seem to agree with. They think he did not act alone. They don't know who formed the rest of his ensemble cast, but they don't think it was a one-man show. That's the thing that more than half of the U.S. seems to agree on even today, that whatever happened, Oswald did not act alone. He was not a one-person play. And technically, if you want to get very technical, that's true. He didn't build the rifle. He wasn't out there gathering ore from somewhere. He didn't make gunpowder. He didn't just naturally pick up a rifle and know how to shoot it. He bought the rifle from somebody. He was trained by the military. But this doesn't mean he was necessarily part of a larger organized group. And it doesn't mean the people who assisted him were necessarily aware of his end game. It's not like he was taking marksman training and someone said, you know, if you do well enough on this, we'll give you a badge. And if you do even better, you might just get to kill the president. Anywho, moving on. I don't think that's how it was advertised, you know. And he told, when he was entering into the Texas School Book Depository, he had this bag. I think he rode the bus there. He told people it's just a bag of curtain rods. And that's an answer that's so boring, you're not really going to follow up on it.
Well, isn't it quaint when you hear stories like this, you know, compared to like post 9/11 America, where you can't go anywhere with so much as a paperclip, you know? It just goes to show how kind of blissfully ignorant we were to the threats that faced us, you know, in the past, I think.
True. And things did change irreparably after the assassination of Kennedy. But we do know some stuff about Oswald, and it's stuff that's real. It's on, well, got a plot twist for you in a second, folks, but let's set it up. Let's ease into it. Oswald traveled a lot, and he did support the communist revolution. He did support Cuba. He visited the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. He also called the Russian embassy while he was in Mexico. And this all went down just a few weeks before the murder. As of now, no one knows for sure what Oswald talked about specifically when he visited the embassy. We know some of the outline of the conversation, but we don't have the full details. And now we have to do a little bit of a thought experiment. Okay, let's say that you are the head of the USSR. You're the head of the government. You get this idea that you can use your deep cover operative Oswald, who is currently in the U.S. and can travel back and forth from the U.S. to Mexico. You get this idea that you can order him to shoot JFK. You probably wouldn't do it just because it makes you by far the number one suspect. This guy has obvious ties to Cuba. He's all about communism. You know, he would have made Russia first to the post. And that kind of move would count as an act of war. Just a very short time after a nuclear Armageddon almost occurred. Because like doing that would mean risking retaliation. Neither government was particularly keen on destroying the planet. But if you kill a president, it might change the conversation. So it seems almost suicidal politically for Russia to do that. I mean, what do you guys think? Like, what do you think about the possibility of Russia ordering an assassination of JFK?
Seems very forward. You know what I mean? It seems like they would be better off waging a disinformation campaign like we've talked about, rather than straight up arranging for an assassination of a head of state with that much heft behind his role. You know what I mean? And that much public awareness, that much potential for backlash. I mean, no, sir. It doesn't make sense. There would be much more clever ways of exerting influence than that.
Maybe just wasn't around a third-story window.
Well, I don't know. In a weird way, if you're, let's say, a splinter group within FSB or like whatever it was at the time, the KGB, if you're a splinter group within there that thinks, oh, the only way for us to truly like gain power over the United States is to go to full war with them, the way to do it would be to assassinate the president, right? Even if it's like not fully on the surface that it was you or that it was USSR that did it, but you would know that the intelligence agencies would know in some way. I don't know. That to me is pretty compelling because it's not. I think the mutual assured destruction thing is on the table there, and it would always be. But maybe there's a calculation that the U.S. wouldn't resort immediately to nukes.
Yeah, I see. That's a really good point. Because that's like an internal power struggle. Mm-hmm. And the question is never really... the most plausible ideas of U.S. government involvement are pretty much the same thing. They're not saying everybody was behind it. They're saying a faction working within the system did it. I think that's a very good point, the more that I think about it. So perhaps leadership wasn't on board, was terrified of the idea, but extremists in the crowd, the kind of folks who would later become fans of people like Alexander Dugin, were all gas, no brakes on that one. It was time for war. You know, the way that some extreme religious groups have publicly stated they hope for a war in the Middle East because they believe it will hasten the prophecies that they have chosen to treat as fact.
Yeah.
But if we're talking government agencies, FSB, KGB, there's one agency, you know them, you love them, you've heard a lot about them. They've done
the agency, yeah. In fact.
Yep, they've done a lot for our show. Paul, can we get an applause sound cue? The Central Intelligence Agency. That's right, folks. The CIA. The Chads in action. The the clearly intelligent agency. Here's the thing. We're joking, but that's actually one of the most difficult theories or alternative narratives to dismiss for several reasons. I mean, one of the first reasons is Kennedy and the CIA hated each other so bad. So, like, think of the person you hate the most in the world pales in comparison. It was,
jeez.
Yeah, it was unsquashable beef. And the CIA, you know, had a long history, even by this point, of pursuing their own interest and also pursuing the financial interest of private companies who had ties, again, typically nepotistic, to the company itself. I mean, for Pete's sake, the CIA informally calls itself the company. You know what I mean? They don't particularly care about separation of church and state, but they would be opposed to separation of business and state. It doesn't make sense to their mission statement, it doesn't make sense to their practice, I should say. So they would function at times actively avoiding oversight. They would function as that faction you just described. And there was a lot of internal dissent at this time. So the basic gist, the CIA had Kennedy killed because they thought he was going to retaliate against them further as punishment for their, frankly, cartoonish attempts to kill Fidel Castro. They thought he might purge the organization, they might disband it entirely. So, in corporate speak, they decided to get in front of it and disband the man first.
So how do we even have the discussion of whether or not this is plausible? Well, we start looking at a certain individual that we've talked about on this show many a times, Mr. Allen Dulles, who...
the Air Force Base guy.
There you go. That it's been... mentioned in the news many
it's
times.
Man. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, God.
It's Friday.
It's so funny
that we were both
so
doing
funny. Well, and we're on this Zoom, so there's my video for some reason is delayed like crazy. So like I say something and I can't even see what they're doing, and then it just happens before I can even retaliate. Interesting.
You were at a significant disadvantage, my good sir.
Yeah.
Oh boy. But yeah. So Allen Dulles, the guy from the Air Force Base, he was on the Warren Commission, and he also was the head of the CIA at one point.
Yes. Yeah. He was the longest serving director of Central Intelligence, or DCI. And he was head of the CIA during the Cold War. He oversaw what went down in Guatemala in 1954. In 1953, the year before that, he was running point on the coup d'etat in Iran. He was big up in the Lockheed U-2 program, the spy planes. He knew about Project MK Ultra before most of us. He was down with the Bay of Pigs. But he was not the director of the CIA when he was on the Warren Commission.
Why? Did something happen?
You know, interesting that you would bring that up, Matt, and how well timed. He was not the head of the CIA at his time in the Warren Commission because Kennedy had fired him. Due to a number of things. But he also, he had a lot of suction in, as the Wire would call it, in the halls of power. And he definitely played a role in the commission's official conclusion that Oswald, acting alone, had killed the president. Kennedy, by the way, before he died, had also cut the CIA's budget by 20%, which is like everybody's scrambling. They're like, how are we going to sell enough Coke to make up for this? You know what I mean?
I do. From personal. It's a question I ask myself every day.
Yeah.
Just to cover costs.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
walking around money. That's what they call that.
Yeah. Our podcast meetings are mainly us looking at the metrics of how much ether, how many quaaludes, and how much weight in cocaine we have to move to keep the show going. So
you mean the CIA? I mean No. Okay.
Yes. And so let's pause for a moment here, just to check our doors and our internet connections and make sure the windows are shut tight. And when we come back, we're going to tell you something pretty interesting about the government's official conclusion when it comes to JFK. We're back. Here's the other thing. When we said not everyone agrees with the Warren Commission, we don't just mean the public. We don't just mean independent investigators, journalists, etc. We mean that the U.S. government is on record disagreeing with itself. Hear that again. The U.S. government said Oswald acted alone, and then the U.S. government said it was a conspiracy.
In 1979, the U.S. House Select Committee on Assassinations, or the HSCA, you know I love an acronym. In our last, actually, Kennedy episode, I really go hard on the acronyms, and you guys indulge me beautifully. But the HSCA concluded that Kennedy was likely assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, that Oswald, in short, did not act alone. In addition to that, they found that a second gunman had likely been present, though the acoustic evidence they based it on today is considered somewhat spurious and has been discredited. In 19... Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because they were listening to those shots.
Right.
This is where the whole grassy knoll situation comes from. That's where the second shooter was supposedly positioned.
Mm-hmm. And the Nas song.
Mm-hmm, of course. And also what I'm named after. I don't know if you know this about me, but I am literally named after the grassy knoll.
I thought you were going to say Nas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's still my favorite pun I ever kicked on the Dan Harmon show. We made it to the title, guys. But yeah, is that not weird? Even if you consider yourself a skeptical person, is that not a bit odd that the Warren Commission, which had arguably some conflicts of interest, said Oswald by himself, that's it. You know, that was their answering clue. It was Oswald in the book depository with the rifle. That was it. And then the same government comes back and says,
somebody else may have been involved because we heard some other shots from probably a different place on that old recording that we had.
Right. And whether or not that recording is discredited, they're finding that there was likely a conspiracy afoot would remain the same, because they're also implying, or they're also saying it's possible. In fact, they said it was probable that someone was supporting Oswald. Because if you look at what he was doing, like even, who's that guy who killed Lincoln?
John Wilkes Booth.
John
the
Wilkes
actor.
Booth. Mm-hmm. Sic Semper Tyrannis. Even, I mean, when Booth was, I don't think there are a lot of people in the crowd who remember this today, but when Booth was in play, 4 people ended up being hanged in association with the conspiracy. So even back then, it wasn't as simple as one person going up and shooting. You had a support staff. So now we turn to New Orleans. I'm sure a couple people heard us say, what, the New Orleans mob? What are they? Why are they getting involved? You know, in 1966, 3 years after the assassination, DA at the time in New Orleans, Jim Garrison, says, you know what? I figured out the answer. A group of far-right extremists worked with a faction of people in the CIA to carry out this murder. And, he said, there's a Dallas businessman named Gary Shaw who was in on it and instrumental in getting the boots on the ground. He was the head of something called the International Trade Mart in New Orleans. Garrison took this seriously. The year after he came out with those accusations, in 1967, he arrested Gary Shaw and eventually took him to trial.
So in 1967, when Shaw is being looked at by the DA, Jim Garrison, this was a story that was getting picked up all over the place, and European press found it. It was just a few days after Shaw, I think, initially got arrested by the authorities. This is an Italian left-wing paper. What's the name of it, Ben? It's like
Paese Sera.
Paese Sera.
Paese Sera. Paese Sera.
There we go. So as soon as this story starts coming out, they're talking about how this dude Shaw has CIA connections. And it was through a board membership that he had with a trade organization called Permidex.
Yes, yeah, Permidex. Permidex had a subsidiary at the time called Centro Mondiale Commerciale, which the paper alleged was a CIA front. We'll call it the CMC for short. Yeah, they said the CMC is a front company. It's another, Freedom Airlines. According to this paper, the CMC was in existence entirely to help the CIA fund illegal espionage activities in Italy. And to Garrison, there was a nuance to the anti-communist and anti-Castro extremists and their cooperation with the CIA. They wanted to cry havoc and loose the dogs of war in a controlled manner. They wanted to kill Kennedy as a way of maintaining U.S.-USSR tensions, hinging upon Cuba, and to prevent the U.S. from withdrawing soldiers, influence, and potential war profits from Vietnam.
Because they wanted to bleed them strategically. No, seriously. Just in the way that the Afghanistan conflict, the way USSR ultimately met its downfall, they were trying to bleed the United States monetarily in Vietnam. Holy crap.
Well, also, I mean, you might be onto something. Here's the thing, Matt, Noel. You could ask if the Vietnam War would have still reached the pitch it did had Kennedy survived. But one thing's for sure, there were a lot of genuine ideologues in the U.S. government at the time. The idea was that if they did not take action, even if that action is bloody, even if that action is illegal, then communism would sweep the world. Now, later retrospect would unfortunately prove that a lot of people pretending to be ideologically motivated were financially motivated through a series of nesting, not widely publicized financial relationships, so they were making money from war. And if you're making money from something, or if it's having a positive impact in your life, then your skills at rationalization get pretty matrix level. You know what I mean?
Dude, I'm sorry. I got my institutions confused. In my mind, I was thinking it was actually the other side playing whatever this faction within the CIA in order to keep the U.S. Sorry, I got my conspiracy theory way too deep there.
But here's the issue, man. Like, how distinct are those entities at certain levels of history? You know what I mean? We talked about that in the tradecraft episode where we had to say, well, how many times does an asset flip? Is it like when you get past quadruple agent and now you're just sort of working on stuff? Like, that happens. That really does happen. And it gets confusing. So the idea here is that in Oswald, these conspirators, these far-right extremists, and again, this is Garrison's idea, these far-right extremists, these anti-Castro Cuban exiles, maybe the mob and the CIA or factions thereof, they found the perfect fall guy. They found the guy that looked like he would kill the president or try to kill the president. If you just read, if you read like a one-sheet resume of Lee Harvey Oswald, you would think, I don't know, I can give it a shot. He looks good for it. Shaw was, like you said, arrested. He was later in a jury trial, and he was found not guilty. So at least 12 people thought the facts didn't add up about Garrison's accusations. And again, this is a DA. He's not, he's not some crackpot. But
dude,
But I mean, if you believe the whole mob angle, then the CIA, like through its proxies, probably would have been able to pay them either through, favors or just cold hard cash, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Hey, it could have even been a threat, like you have to help us, Don Gabagool, or we will turn the screws up on your smuggling operation or something like that. We'll shut down the union, etc. So let's move from here to talk a little bit about Oswald. First things first. Yes, he was definitely there in Dallas, we mean. He was definitely in Dallas. Second, yes, he definitely fired that rifle. There's no way around it. His prints are on the gun. He did that. And third, yes, the guy very much did want to murder the president of the United States. But as anybody who's currently got a pile of laundry sitting at home right now can agree, wanting to do a thing and actually doing the thing are two very, very, very different things.
Dude, I'm going to get to it tonight. Jeez, Ben. Yeah. Like literally, it's on my list for tonight.
Well, but here's my question. Like, if we are to believe the government angle or this in some way using Oswald as a pawn, like, how do you look for fanatics like that who fit the bill and then make them do the thing and act, treat them as like puppets? While also
you're monitoring all of these extremist groups, right?
Sure.
And if somebody is traveling internationally a lot, you've got tabs on those people, especially if they're ex-military. So you're already monitoring them. You know where they're going. You know who they're meeting with, probably, or at least you're monitoring that group that this person X met with a couple of different times when they were in Mexico or when they were in, Russia or something. You could just then learn way too much about your target that you're imagining could be a patsy / fall guy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it all makes sense. Like, unfortunately,
well, when you put it like that, Matt, it sure as hell does.
Yeah. But let's throw a twist in it. That's what this show's about. So here, at this point, I'd like to introduce you all to a guy named Gayton Fonzie. I like the Fonz, who was hired by two different groups, U.S. government-affiliated groups. The Church Committee hired him in 1975. The HSCA, that we mentioned earlier, hired him in 1977. This dude was hired to investigate this case, and he believes there is a CIA Mafia Oswald link. And he thinks a guy named David Atlee Phillips, very interesting character, helped orchestrate Oswald's guilt, or helped, make his story look better. Phillips, Fonzie believed, was a CIA operative who actively worked to embellish Oswald's public image, or his image to intelligence, as a communist sympathizer. But Fonzie thinks it goes deeper than that. It's deeper than rap here. Fonzie believes that someone hired, and he thinks it was Phillips, hired an Oswald impersonator to visit that embassy in Mexico. And he was based, based in the slang term about this, he was convinced that people who had seen this, quote unquote, this Oswald had seen a different person because he interviewed people who described the guy they met. And that physical description did not fit Oswald. There were sketches of this guy, apparently, that did not look a thing like Oswald. And get this, J. Edgar Hoover agreed. The director of the FBI was freaked out by this, and he also wondered whether it was Oswald. He didn't say there was definitely an impersonator, but it's weird. He's mystified, and you can tell in his writing. We have a quote from the very day after JFK's assassination where Hoover writes the following.
The Central Intelligence Agency advised that on October 1st, 1963, an extremely sensitive source had reported that an individual identifying himself as Lee Oswald contacted the Soviet embassy in Mexico City, inquiring as to any messages. Special agents of the Bureau who have conversed with Oswald in Dallas, Texas, have observed photographs of the individual referred to above and have listened to a recording of his voice. The special agents are of the opinion that the referred to individual was not Lee Harvey Oswald.
Whoa.
Yeah. So the Hoove man, Heavy H, is going, what? Extremely sensitive source, by the way. That phrase means it's someone highly placed, and it also means it's someone they trust. someone who's been legit in the past.
Someone whose cover they don't want to blow, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But even just as importantly, someone they believe will be telling the truth. So Fonzie also found, you'll hear the stories that Oswald sucked at Russian, that his Russian was broken, pretty much unintelligible, that the folks in Russian intelligence he tried to contact were like, yeah, what are you talking about? Can we switch English? Your English is much better. There was someone claiming to be Oswald, and they spoke terrible Russian, almost as bad as that fake Russian accent I did. But the real Oswald, apparently, was pretty much fluent in Russian. He was considered to be. Add a little more gas to this fire. This will hopefully send everybody off in your own bag of badgers and rabbit holes. There is a conversation between Lyndon Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover that echoes the same concerns. And you can find it online. You can only find it online now because it wasn't declassified for a very long time. And what I think we do is I'd like to set you guys up for a little bit of acting, a little bit of improv. Matt, why don't we cast you as Lyndon Johnson, and Noel nailed that Hoover quote, so why don't you be Hoover if you guys are comfortable with that?
Sure.
All right. So the phone, let's just for the sake of this, let's imagine they're on the phone. So like the phone rings.
Have you established any more about the Oswald visit to the Soviet embassy in Mexico in September?
No, there's one angle that's very confusing for this reason. We have up here the tape and the photograph of the man at the Soviet embassy using Oswald's name. That picture and the tape do not correspond to this man's voice, nor to his appearance. In other words, it appears that there was a second person who was at the Soviet embassy.
Boom. I need that applause cue, Paul. Clap at home. Great job, guys.
Dude. So they're talking about this. These two extremely powerful people in the know are talking about how there's two Oswalds.
Yeah. Yeah. It just
both involved with the embassy in Mexico. What the hell?
Didn't tell the American public. So was somebody, again, Oswald was there. He did have the gun, but where he was in Dallas, was somebody trying to make this story even more airtight. The guy in charge of the FBI, the guy in charge of the White House, both of them are having a what the moment. You know what I mean? This is just a few notches down from that scene at the end of Usual Suspects. Not to endorse Spacey, where the detective is looking at the bulletin board and going, hang on.
Hey, spoiler alert real quick, and go.
That's it. We're leaving it at the hang on.
Yeah.
We're leaving it at the hang on.
You know who's not there having that conversation? The director of intelligence, the CIA.
Yeah. And and Dulles is waking up and his family's like, why are you in such a good mood? And he goes, I don't know, I just have a good vibe today. I'm kidding. We're not accusing him of that. We're just saying those guys didn't get along while JFK was alive. But
that's it.
Do we need to run that by legal?
No, fine.
So this is where we're going to leave it for now. There is so very much we've not gotten to yet. What about the three tramps? Those were all later identified as actual homeless people who had gone to a shelter the night before the attack. They were in the area for sure. What about the accusations against the Federal Reserve? What about the umbrella man that we mentioned? What about the idea of a second shooter? And so on and so on. Was Jack Ruby motivated by patriotism when he suddenly assassinated Oswald, snipping free the most important loose end of the story? Or was he part of a larger plan? I mean, guys, this feels like it could be a 3-parter, a 4-parter, a new show. I don't know. But the issue here is that no matter what, none of these theories will ever be fully put to rest until the government finally declassifies whatever secrets it's still holding back. And it's very, very possible that I would say probable that those secrets, whatever they may be, will never see the light of day. In reality, it goes back to one single fact, and it should keep you up at night. What is the motivation for keeping this stuff secret? What exactly is Uncle Sam hiding? Because even if you believe it's just Oswald acting on his own, the U.S. government is hiding something. And just to appeal to the cheapskates in the crowd, you're paying for it. Don't ever forget that part. Like you're paying for the markers, you're paying for the printing, you're paying for, if there's a cover up, you're paying for that.
For whoever that body double was, it was pretending to be Oswald.
You paid for, whatever restaurant they ate at indirectly. And you'll keep paying.
Jeez.
That's how taxes work.
I really have to just say, like, it's been a while since I really delved into this and thinking about it all again. Like, we had that discussion on Harmontown about this stuff, and man, it feels like we're on the precipice of learning what happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's gonna be bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be bad.
I don't buy it. I don't think we're ever gonna know.
I think we will.
You really do?
Yep.
You want to place bets?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
I think this is what's going to happen. Julian Assange is going to escape. First thing on his list, get those last JFK files.
All right, can we make bets on each stage of your scenario here, like they do in like the big high level betting part, where you can like bet on whether it rains in the third quarter of a football game?
Yeah, I'm just playing. I don't know.
Yeah,
we may never know.
Well, that's the thing. Specifically, we making and listening to this show today may never know. It may be released after some folks die. It may be released after our time this go round has passed. So it may just end up being an historical mystery, but again, more than half of the U.S. is waiting to hear what they think is the real story. And the thing that's fascinating about this for me is every time I throw up my hands and think, well, yeah, maybe it's just that easy. Maybe through a combination of evil luck, the devil's luck, they will call it, being in the right place at the right time. Maybe Oswald won the dark lottery of being a one-man shooter and put one of the world's most important people to rest on his own. And then you run into other stuff like the new president and the director of the FBI at an absolute loss over who actually walked into that embassy in Mexico.
All right, what do you have to say? Seriously, you can contact us all kinds of different ways. Twitter, Facebook, we're Conspiracy Stuff. Instagram, Conspiracy Stuff Show. We ask, please, if you have a moment, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. It would be awesome if it was kind and 5 stars. Doesn't have to be. That'd be super cool.
It could be mean and 5 stars.
Yeah. Yeah, you can do that if you want to. If you don't like social media, YouTube, by the way, YouTube Conspiracy Stuff. If you don't like social media, there are other ways to find us.
That's right. You can use your appendages, your vestigial digits, is that what they're called, to dial a telephone. If it's doing one of those with the buttons, or if it's one of those rotary ones, you can just use one finger. It takes a longer time, but it's also cool because it makes a neat clicky sound. And you can dial 1-833-STDWYTK, then proceed to use your mouth to talk into the mouthpiece of that telephone while listening with your ear to the sound of Ben's dulcet tones, welcoming you to the hotline, at which point he will prompt you to leave a message. You have 3 minutes to tell us your tale. Those 3 minutes belong to you. Enjoy them, but use them wisely. And if you need more time than that, or you really want to give us a whole rundown with links and details and dates and bullet points and all that stuff, footnotes, you can send us a good old-fashioned email. We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.